Happy Thursday. Happy May Day. It is what this really is the 1 month anniversary of the ToddCast. So, when you in content creator years, 1 month, that's the equivalent of 5 years of service these days. I have kid, but I'm having a blast. I hope you're enjoying the content we're creating. I have an amazing team around me that has been able to get me into some social spaces that I had not been to before, including my new and growing audience on YouTube. Like and subscribe. Do I say that enough? So I appreciate that. Apple Podcast, Spotify. By the way, I tweeted out, we know some of you who get Apple, or we're fixing that and feed issue, and that should be up and running without any problems, without you having to manually refresh very soon. But before I get to my guest, and I tell you, this is going to be a fantastic interview. You're going to love it. It's Charlie Brooker. He is the creator of Black Mirror, the amazing Netflix series that's sort of, near term, the futuristic. Some people think it's all dystopian. What's interesting is, I will tell you this. I had a lot of thoughts of what I thought motivated Charlie Brooker on various shows. I bet you, as Black Mirror fans, you will assume some things that you will find out are not true. The what motivated him? What were his creative mentors, if you will, both individuals and of different movies and shows? Just trust me, you're going to love this interview. You're going to love him, and you're going to learn a lot about what it takes to create Black Mirror in the mind of Charlie Brooker. It is just, I would have him on weekly if he had the time to do it. And there's no doubt, as you'll find out in this interview, this dude would be a lot of fun to be in a writer's room with. That's for sure. But before I get to there, I've spent a lot of time this week talking about the first 100 days of Donald Trump. But there is an opposition party that's out there, and I thought it would be worth doing the first 100 days report card, if you will, for the Democrats. Because as bad as things have gone for Donald Trump, this has not been a seesaw. As Trump goes down, Democrats go up. That has not been the case. In fact, the hallmark of all of the polling you've seen is, even as Donald Trump's going down, the brand of the Democratic Party has yet to improve in the minds of voters. And arguably, that's a pretty honest assessment, right? What have the Democrats done to improve their brand? They really haven't done anything yet. If anything, they're still trying to figure it out. It isn't clear where this party is headed. What is universally clear, though, is that the D.C. leadership of the Democratic Party is not very popular at all, whether it's Hakeem Jeffries, Chuck Schumer. They're feeling some pressure. I've talked to some donors who are very frustrated with Jeffries, don't understand why Nancy Pelosi is still sort of lingering over the leadership of the House. As much, I had one prominent donor say to me over the weekend, I'm glad Nancy Pelosi was there to do what was needed to be done with Joe Biden's candidacy, but her shadow over the party is only hurting Jeffries in the long run, and is only hurting the party's brand in the long run. If the party is going to try to gear itself to the future, its leadership of the previous 20 years probably needs to step aside completely. So that you certainly hear that. Obviously, Chuck Schumer's been feeling the heat. He's probably getting more of the arrows than most, considering he had to make a tough decision, which was whether to shut down the government or sort of let Donald Trump have a situation that wasn't going to be popular with the base of his party. I do think politically he made the right call. He just communicated the idea extraordinarily poorly, since he spent one day talking up the idea of orchestrating a shutdown and then immediately backtracking on that front. But his political calculus about what the right call was, I think, has turned out to be right, which is, don't get in Donald Trump's way if he's in the middle of hurting himself politically. That's been the James Carville strategy. So I would say, if you were going to give grades, the DC leadership is not getting good grades. I don't think they're getting passing grades yet. Now the question is, who individually has had a good first 100 days in the Democratic Party? Well, probably the best way to judge that is you look at it through the prism of future elections and the prism of trying to position yourself as a leader or a player at the table, trying to figure out what is the Democratic Party going to look like? What is the Democratic brand going to be? So immediately, when you look at people who have made an early effort to make an impression, Cory Booker, he certainly has decided to take matters more into his own hands. He did the 25-hour filibuster, which got a reasonable amount of attention. In fact, when he timed it, if you recall, I thought it was fascinating when he timed it. He timed it during the election and day of that first special election in April, which had the Wisconsin election and those two specials in Florida. So it was sort of feeding the Democratic base as they were getting excited about winning some of these special elections, overperforming in some of these special elections. And here he was sort of hijacking the DC message machine for a day. So I think, and over the weekend, Cory Booker and Hakeem Jeffries did a live stream from the Capitol steps. So I think Booker is trying to become one of, trying to find his voice as a Trump resistor. Another sort of DC insider that's trying that same thing is Chris Murphy, the Democratic senator from Connecticut. He's been trying to get on more socials, trying to sort of also become more of an outside voice in pushing the party. And clearly is probably somebody at least thinking about running for president. I think Cory Booker, fair to say that he's thinking about running for president. Other Democrats in the first 100 days. So I think for the most part, both Cory Booker and Chris Murphy, as far as their own standing, have made progress in where they're trying to get to. I don't know if they're the right answer. We're going to find out, right? Cory Booker could not get traction when he ran for president in 2020. Maybe that'll change this time, but some of the efforts he's making, you can see what he's doing, and it makes sense. Chris Murphy, same thing, gets a little less attention than Cory Booker, but you see what he's trying to do. It may be just the Washington baggage. I'm convinced that the Democratic primary electorate come 2027, 2028 is just going to care about two things, new and electable. Now, electable is going to be a debate, right? Everybody has a different version of who's electable and what's electable. But new, I think, is going to be a big deal, right? On the other first 100 days, Bernie Sanders and AOC. Obviously, I think Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez has probably had for her personal politics, a very strong first 100 days, right? She's already in line. There's no question anymore of who's the heir apparent to the Bernie movement. It is her. It is not going to be Ro Khanna. It is not going to be anybody else. It is going to be her. It is hers unless somehow she decides not to run for president. Now, she's got two options sitting in front of her in 2028. If she chooses not to run for president, she could run for a Chuck Schumer Senate seat. I'd be, as I told you in a previous, during the Dan Goldman preview there when I said keep an eye on him for the future. I believe, I don't believe Schumer ends up running for reelection by 2028, right? That just, you kind of see where that's going. And I think he could be vulnerable in a primary if he's not careful in 2028. I don't think that's the way he would want to go out. So I don't know this. Nobody knows this. He's certainly been a very successful New York politician. So I'm not going to sit here and say that he should know when the time to go is, but I certainly, if I were a betting man, and as many of you know, I do enjoy a FanDuel app every now and then. I certainly would be betting against him running for reelection in 28. So the question is, does she want to be a constant long-term player in DC, or does she want to go for it and seeing if she can win the nomination? I'm skeptical she can win the nomination. I'm not sure. I go back to electability. Will she be able to pass the electability test, which is, again, very subjective, but I think the perception, and we'll see what the evidence shows, but I think she starts with a perception that she's going to have a hard time winning in places like Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. But I'm going to just always be careful I'm not going to undersell her. She is what I like to describe as a very talented political athlete. And sometimes, you look at the NFL draft and you'll see somebody's got, his arms are too short, or he doesn't have big enough hands and all this stuff. But they're just so good at being a football player. They overcome whatever physical trait that they should have that they don't have. And so I feel the same way about politicians, is that, they can be such good campaigners. They can overcome, maybe it's a character flaw, maybe they overcome an ideological issue, whatever it is. that you can overcome these things if you're talented enough. So I'm hesitant to assume AOC can't overcome these things. I think she's proven to be a talented politician, and I'm just watching her go from activist to elected activist to start trying to have more say, both figuring out how to balance inside game versus outside game. But overall, I think you could say AOC has had a very strong first 100 days because she now is certainly the one getting in front of crowds, whether they're Bernie generated, how much she's in charge of that, how much it's Bernie's operation. That's still a pretty strong first 100 days. Then there's Pete Buttigieg. His decision not to seek any office in Michigan, and he was contemplating. There are two open seats in Michigan, a Senate seat and a governor's seat. Of course, he's a new resident there. He moved there, changed his residency to Michigan from Indiana. He and his husband moved there. His husband's from Michigan. So the question was going to be whether he would seek statewide office in 26. And I think if he did, he was taking himself out of 28. If you're running for a new office in 26, I think it's hard to run in 28. If you're running for re-election in 26 to set up a run in 28, I think that's a different story. J.B. Pritzker, the governor of Illinois, appears to be on that track, although it's interesting to me that David Axelrod, who's an Illinois guy through and through, is a little skeptical about whether, if he wants to run for president, whether it's a good idea to also seek re-election, because Illinois might not be the as easy of a win for him as it has been in the past. But remember, he is a billionaire, the heir to the Hyatt fortune. So there is plenty of money there for J.B. Pritzker. So I don't, is he somebody that's had a good first 100 days? He's also somebody that wants to become the resistor on the gubernatorial side of things, more so than a Gretchen Whitmer, who's been seen working with Trump. Has she gotten too close to Trump? I think she certainly had the worst photo op moment of any Democrat in the first 100 days with the infamous folder over her face. And then she, look, if she wants to rise above partisanship, she can't keep apologizing for showing up at events with Republicans. That's a habit she's got to break if she really wants to rise above and say and be willing to go to places other Democrats aren't going to go. So far, essentially, she's done that twice now with Trump, but she's apologized. I didn't plan to speak, right? It's coming across as if like, please don't be mad at me, Democratic base, that I'm doing this. But hey, swing voters, look what I'm doing, right? You got to sort of project more confidence in that. So I think the ideas she's pursuing are good. How she's gone about them right now, I think could use some work. There's Gavin Newsom, who started a podcast in the first 100 days to try to break out of the stereotype San Francisco liberal narrative that I do think is going to haunt him for however long he wants to be in the national spotlight. There's no doubt he has ambition to run for president. I'm somebody who believes his best shot was primarying Biden when that talk was active and he decided not to. I think my guess is, if he ever, I always say this, the later in life, the more you age, you do start not worrying about the things that you did. You start wondering and regretting the things that you didn't do. I have a feeling Gavin Newsom forever is going to regret not primarying Biden in 24. That road not traveled will be one that he wonders what would have happened had he did. Would the entire party be in better shape? Would he be seen as a hero even if he didn't win? Who knows? But the extreme effort he's making to try to sort of left-wingivize himself, right? De-progressivize him. I don't know what you want to call it that he's trying to do, but he's sort of like, I'm not sure how comfortable I am being a Democrat. He's sort of acknowledging the elephant in the room with people who, but is he also gone a little bit, is it a little too manufactured, right? Is it going to be, he's got to pass whatever, authenticity is another subjective word. You got to be authentic. Well, authentic to whom, right? But I get the overall idea. If it looks like you're trying too hard, voters will punish that as well. So I'd give him a mixed grade, A for effort. But I don't know if, just like I would with Gretchen Whitmer, A for effort, but I'm not quite sure if the execution's been as good as it could be. And then there's the people that I expect to be players in 28 that have decided not yet to raise their profile. Wes Moore, governor of Maryland. Andy Beshear, governor of Kentucky. Raphael Warnock, senator from Georgia. Mark Kelly, senator from Arizona. Ruben Gallego, senator from Arizona. I was talking to a pollster earlier this week who said to me, when we were talking about the Wes Moore candidacy, because I think that's going to be, assuming he runs in 28, I think he will be the biggest establishment organization on the Democratic side. I think he'll have some of the biggest donors. He'll have, big some of the big names around him. Him and Buttigieg, I expect to be sort of the biggest traditional sort of campaign operations you have out there. Um, but I had somebody ask me, it's like, if you're going to try to rerun Obama, be careful, right? It may be, especially now that Latino voters are the new swing voters of American politics, should the Democrats be looking for a Latino leader? And so just keep an eye on Ruben Gallego. He was pretty liberal as a member of the House, but he really has been trying to sort of recenter himself with a statewide Arizona electorate. He did, he got a little room to run because of who his opponent was in the Senate race, so that helped him a little bit. But he's still probably, he's been hewing very close to Mark Kelly here. I just keep an eye on him. I just think that there isn't a lot of Latino leaders that feel like they're on the cusp of putting together national campaigns that are not associated with an ideology. I have AOC, but I think I don't know if she would have an automatic appeal to that swing voting working class Latino voter that may be voting more on some cultural issues that they're uncomfortable with on the progressive side. So it's something to watch there, and it's something that I'm curious about. So look, I think the Democratic brand is in the toilet, and all the polling, even after the first 100 days, shows you that it still is. Voters can believe two things at the same time. Trump's presidency is going horribly, and they haven't yet seen anything out of the Democrats that's appetizing. It's pretty clear the DC leadership is getting a failing grade. The DNC is mired in its own intra-party feud over David Hogg and primarying individuals, all of those things. The new DNC chair, I think, has had a hard time sort of establishing himself, frankly, yet I think bogged down a bit by this David Hogg controversy and the fact that both Schumer and Jeffries have their own challenges being the official leadership of the Washington class of Democrats. And it's been fascinating. You do get the sense that a lot of Democrats have decided to take this branding issue and try to deal with it themselves. And I expect more of this. This is what happened to the Democrats after 1988, and this is what happened to the Democrats to a lesser extent after 2005 and 2004. So I expect more of this, and this is something about every when we're going to check in on the status of Trump and the MAGA, we're going to do this with the Democrats as well. So with that, I'm going to pause there. Again, you are going to love this conversation with Charlie Brooker. Please enjoy it. I'm a obsessive Black Mirror fan. Sometimes I can't watch back-to-back episodes though, and get a good night's sleep. So I do sort of limit my exposure to Black Mirror about 1 or 2 episodes a week as I digest the dystopian nature of our future. Enjoy the interview and enjoy this break. Charlie Brooker, you are a guest that my wife is probably more excited about than anybody that I've booked so far.
Well,
She's
then you. Is
obsessed
that what
with
you were going to
Black
say?
Mirror.
Your
I'm
wife's
excited
more
too. Don't get me wrong,
Okay.
but you've made the missus really happy that
Oh, good.
you're going to be a guest on the ToddCast here.
Good. That's nice to know.
So let me start with this before we get into Black Mirror. Do you feel like you are the 21st century George Orwell?
No, I would never. Uh, no, I mean, I think that. I mean, that would be nice. I won't. If somebody wants to make that comparison, I'm not going to spend 4 hours trying to desperately talk them out of it. But no, I think he was probably a more astute political writer in many. I mean, I could list all his
Yeah.
um, qualities. That I'm being very British about it, aren't I? I'm being
You
sort of
are,
very British and
right?
self-deprecating and
Like
going, no, I'm not fit
the
to.
faux humility, right? I'm kidding.
Yeah.
I'm kidding. Please don't tell me, no, more.
I suppose it depends. What do you mean in terms of what do you mean? What do you mean by that? In that he wrote 1984 and it
Well,
was
when you look at Orwell, and he's probably the most prominent, right? Here's somebody who wrote about a futuristic dystopia.
yeah.
Obviously his was political satire.
Mhm.
Yours is cultural as well as societal and political,
Mhm.
I would say. But in many ways, I when I try to separate those two, I have many people say, well, no, everything's politics now. Everything is
Yeah,
all fused together, right? Everything,
yeah.
and I hate accepting that premise, but I understand why people think that. So that's why, I mean, I look at it. If George Orwell were reincarnated today, he wouldn't be writing novels. He'd probably making episodic series like you're doing, I guess.
Probably, I suppose, probably. And then, and I'd probably be moaning that his show was doing better than mine or something. Um, yes, maybe, I suppose. It's interesting because I do. Do you know what I mean? It's an odd. Black Mirror is a weird show in that I don't see it as the job of the show to like be a sort of warning. I feel like 1984 was probably more felt like a warning, more overtly a
Oh,
warning.
wow. A lot of people
Um,
watch you, I think, watch these episodes and view it as a warning. You don't view it
I
as a warning.
think
That's interesting.
I well, I don't. I suppose maybe I don't explicitly set out to be a warning because I'm a what it probably is, and a psychologist could probably would probably like, be able to work out what it is better than me. It's probably I'm a worrier. I'm quite an anxious and neurotic person, but I've also got a background in comedy.
Right.
Quite often, it's me kind of worrying out loud. Sometimes the
Hmm.
episodes are kind of me worrying out loud. Sometimes I'm trying to sometimes it's actually coming from a sort of really darkly comic place that we then play straight, if you sort of
Right.
in the show itself. So I'm sort of, but predominantly I'm trying to entertain more than I'm trying to warn. And if I'm trying to warn, I'm not always, I wouldn't necessarily boil it down to a specific warning. The one thing that frustrates me is when people say it's a warning about technology, which I really don't think that the show is.
Well, let's stop beating around the bush. What's the show?
What is it?
You just, yeah.
It's a cookery show. No, it's a what am I talking about? No, it's well, okay. So it definitely it's more about people, I think. I think because I think what the show I'm actually impressed by technology in my everyday life. I think technology is amazing. And I used to
Mhm.
be a video games journalist. I'm quite
So
nerdy.
you don't have a phobia to
I don't have
technology.
a phobia about, I'm impressed and amazed by technology, and I tend to be an early adopter of, well, certainly like video game consoles and
Right.
things like that. So I'm sort of like a tech enthusiast in many ways. And I think, but like I say, I am a worrier. And I think that I am often awestruck by what technology can do. And then that naturally leads you to worry about the implications of a powerful tool, because it's a
Hmm.
powerful tool. Um, and and we're amazing creatures because we
Right.
created these tools, but we're also there's loads of us, and we can be clumsy, we've got
Right.
faults, we've got flaws, and so it's sort of so if there's any sort of parable going on, it's really usually in our stories it's usually a sort of active human clumsiness or an active
Yeah.
human impulsiveness or greed or jealousy or something like that that actually is the downfall of the character.
Well, it's interesting. I watch Black Mirror with the following thought in mind is that you're doing the due diligence on the impact on human beings that the
Mhm.
tech companies themselves don't do.
I
Right?
know.
You're sort of like, and that's what I feel. In some ways, you're the test kitchen for where this is headed. And I sit there and because we talk like there are no ethics boards with any of these. They all every once in a while OpenAI claims, oh, we have ethicists on staff, or we're trying to
Mhm.
have an ethics board, but really they don't. In many ways, you're the human ombudsman for technology right now. In that, I
Well,
feel like
that is a
you're the human test kitchen. Like, okay, yes, here's this amazing tool. Like, take your first episode. I feel like we can spoil episode one. I hope everybody's
yeah.
already seen episode one. So take
Mhm.
that episode. In some ways, you're optimistic. Look at this. We're going to be able to cure, we're going to be able to essentially replace pieces of the brain. That's
Yeah.
exciting. And
Yeah.
in fact, that
It's
is
life-saving
close.
in the story. It's in the story,
Right.
it's absolutely life-saving. It's
and
transformative.
then
Yeah.
but then you sort of you go, okay, but what if it has to do, what if you're sort of stuck always having to be connected to the cloud,
It
and
becomes a
it
subscription model and
right.
they're
And
totally crushed. Yeah,
And I could see your comedian side in you. Wouldn't that be hilarious, right? You're like, up, nope, got
yeah.
to upgrade. You got to be on, plus, or premium or whatever it is. Um, but I could watch that episode and say you're an optimist about where we're going and to be able to
Mhm.
like with the brain, and you're a cynic because you assume somebody's going to want to profit off of people's pain and suffering.
Well, I mean, you could argue that that's cynical or unfortunately
True.
um, true. Yes,
Yeah.
realistic. And it's interesting that um, uh, the where that story came about. That came about from me listening to a podcast, and it
I've
was
heard this
I mean,
story. I'm glad you're telling it. I find it fascinating. Explain.
so I was listening to a podcast. I listen to a lot of podcasts, and when the host has to do an immediate pivot into a sales pitch, it strikes me as really quite weird when they go from talking very naturally into a slightly more robotic kind of sales
This is
pitch.
this
And
is
I
of course is when my producers are going to when our salespeople will insert the ad that's going to
would
be
insert
in
the
our
ad,
cut. Right,
insert
right
ad
here. Right. Yeah.
here.
Yeah.
And I
No.
think I'd listened to like a true crime podcast,
Yeah.
and the guy was sort of recounting some grisly, like terrible, terrible incident, and then sort of had to suddenly pivot into pitching a sort of food delivery company, like kind of seamlessly. And this struck me as darkly hilarious. And
Right.
so going into that story, I thought, okay, that's a very Black Mirror-y idea because I'd been thinking about, well, what if you had a service that could kind of stream part of your brain? Like, you
Yeah.
know what I mean? If you lose part of your brain, but there's a backup, it can stream it to you, but you've got all these issues to do with coverage, cell coverage,
Right.
and then the idea of adverts that became a funny and quite dystopian thought. And
Hmm.
um, and so I approached that story thinking this is going to be a comedy, and it is
Mm.
a comedy until it isn't. And I think that's why it's quite. Um, I think obviously in that episode, I think it's a very powerful episode. I think Chris and Rashida and Tracy, who star in it, and Ali Panku, the director. I think everybody did an amazing job. And it's like slightly wrong foots you because it looks like it's going to be a comedic story, and
Oh,
then
they
it
sold it.
becomes
Yeah.
and then the logic of the cold logic of it gets
Yeah.
more and more inescapable. Um, and I think that's I quite often that's my that's not my happy place, but that's my natural I'm trying not to say wheelhouse. Don't like that phrase. I don't even
Oh,
know what a wheelhouse is. What is a wheelhouse?
I guess where
Um,
they housed wheels. You're right. I
is it
love
like a
express. By the way, it's like when you're when what is it what is it when people use undaunted and I'm daunted. You know what I mean, or something like that. We have these weird
right?
expressions where we never use other parts of the word. So I don't know. Do we go to the house to put wheels in it? Right. What is a right?
None of
Is it
us
where
know.
Michelin's are made? Right. You're right.
We've
This
all
is a
been saying it, and none of us know. It's like,
yeah.
so I quite like taking a premise that's sort of comic, and then you find the sort of sometimes the horror angle. Sometimes we've done episodes that are more optimistic, but I suppose they're. What am I saying? That you realize then that you've got a story that is actually commenting on lots of things,
Hmm.
healthcare, and healthcare, just sort of general cost of living and
Well,
sense of
right,
everything being
the fairness
squeezed.
of healthcare, right? Like we all know we come up with these amazing cures, or there's medicine out
Mhm.
there, but only for those that can afford it,
Yeah,
right?
I obviously have a slightly different
Until we make
perspective.
other right,
I'm in the UK, and I can't imagine. So I have, we have the NHS here, which is free at the point
right,
of use, all of that. So Breaking Bad wouldn't have really worked here as a show, like if you said it in the UK, because Walter White would go and get treatment. With like he'd now the NHS has all sorts of faults, but you would go and get life-saving treatment very quickly,
right.
and you wouldn't be bankrupted for that here. So that um, so sometimes you realize, oh, I'm commenting on that. I didn't realize when I walked into this sort of room narratively, I didn't realize that it was also full of all of this stuff. And so you kind of realize you're in quite a rich um environment in a way. So you can comment on lots of things. And also that episode is, am I allowed to what what's the language like on this
Oh,
podcast?
we don't
I can
edit.
say
You
okay,
can say
okay.
what you
Well,
want.
no, no. Well, it's not a massively offensive word. Have you heard the word enshittification?
In shitification, I have heard that word.
Yeah.
Yes.
So it's not my phrase. Cory Doctorow is this
Yeah.
writer who coined this phrase enshittification. And I was thinking also of that, which is the process by which platforms or services like the experience for the user degrades over time because the
Well,
company
that's
behind it
been
has to make a profit. It's the
right.
story of
That's
everything. It's yeah.
Well, it's like all
Mm.
these tech companies, right? I sit there with the
Mhm.
big tech, whether it's Facebook or let's take Facebook and X, two
Mm.
really fun experiences when they first were rolled out, and then they became public companies, and then suddenly they had to convince shareholders that they could keep people on the site longer, and they were staying on the
Yeah.
platform longer, and then they were putting more ads to them. Now, how did they do that? They cranked up the algorithms of anger and grievance and hate, right? Like it
Mm.
is and then you have and then you look at what Elon Musk did, and he took all the whatever guardrails there were on X, he took them off, and I think that guy was writing about the enshittification of Twitter, if I'm
It
not
was
mistaken. Like that was
yeah,
one
kind
of
of
the
everything.
examples. Yeah.
Kind of and kind of sort of everything. Sort
Hmm.
of everything. And it's hard to leave. Like as a user, it's hard to leave. So actually it's a bit like being
Because you
trapped in a
remember,
loveless
you're right, because you
well, it
also
was.
remember when it was good. Yeah.
You went, it's like being trapped in a loveless marriage. It's sort
Yeah.
of like it's like you're trapped in this. You entered into it, it was fun, and
Considering
now
that
you're
my
just
wife is listening to this one very closely, I don't know what that is, Charlie. I
you
don't
don't know
know,
what you don't know
yeah.
what I'm talking.
Don't
Well,
know
also,
what you're talking about.
my wife doesn't know what I'm talking about. No, but I do mean as a metaphor.
Of course.
It's like a not what you thought you were getting into at the
Right.
start, and you can't see like, social media, all sorts of platforms. You can't see a way. You're addicted to it now as well, or smoking. Like
Yeah.
smoking as well. It's
You
like
know it's
smoking.
bad. Yeah.
You
Oh,
know it's
I think
bad, and it's moreish.
yeah.
Um, yeah. So
So take me back to the creation, because what I love about your
mhm.
background, you give a lot of hope to all of us recovering journalists who think they have
Right.
these creative ideas that we're all going to become, we're all going to make some incredible
How do I
episodic
give anyone
show
hope?
that hopes it, yeah. Um, but how long did you have this in your head as an idea for a TV series before you actually could get it to fruition?
Um, Actually, not. It's it's so I so my career path is weird, and again, sort of slightly makes sense in retrospect. So I was a cartoonist
Hmm.
first of all. I was a cartoonist. Then I was a video games journalist. Then I was sort of doing a website. Then I was working in comedy, and I was writing for The Guardian. But I was doing like TV reviews, and I never considered myself a journalist. I would write columns and I would write TV reviews, but I always considered myself a bit of a clown, really. Do you know what I mean? Like I was attempting to do comedy bits. I was always
Okay.
writing comedy. And then I'd had an idea we did a show. I had an idea for a show in the UK which took a comic premise and then played it straight. It was a zombie show.
Hmm.
And the premise was that there's a series of the TV show, a season of Big Brother, the reality show, which at the time was absolutely massive in the UK. And the premise was there was a season of Big Brother, and what if there was a zombie apocalypse broke out during this, and the people in the Big Brother house, who had been chosen by producers to argue and fight and not get along, are sort of the only people left alive in the whole of
Yeah.
Britain. Um, and then I thought the other fun thing was I was a fan of sort of horror and zombie things. I thought, well, what if we play it straight? Was the other sort of the idea. And we did that, and it went down really well. It was like really successful. And then so it was Channel 4 in the UK said, well, what else would you like to do? And I'd always been an admirer of the Twilight Zone. And
Yes.
we had a show in the UK, Tales of the Unexpected, which was short Roald Dahl stories. The BBC often used to, when I was growing up, they put out these really bizarre sort of one-off plays sometimes about
Hmm.
you couldn't kind of you'd go into school the next day like, did you see that thing where a man fell in love with a tree or whatever? It's like crazy sort of avant-garde plays, and then really terrifying films about nuclear war and stuff like this. And so I sort of that was what I pitched, and it was originally the idea. It didn't have the technological focus so much. The original
Hmm.
pitch, it was more. I was interested in. I read about Rod Serling, who created the Twilight Zone,
Yep.
and I read a sort of biography of about him, and I didn't. I hadn't appreciated. So the Twilight Zone was always niche in the UK. You had to see it. It was like on late at night, sort of like ten
Mm,
thirty p.m. or
yeah.
11 p.m., like tucked away on a channel and at random times. And but it would still really stand up and speak to me. And I hadn't appreciated that Rod Serling was a. I'd only known him as the guy from the Twilight Zone, that he was when the Twilight Zone was first announced, people were going, "Why on earth is he debasing himself doing a show? He's a serious playwright. He's a
Yes.
serious writer. Why is he doing a silly show about? It looks like this is going to be about UFOs and little green men and
Right.
aliens and different dimensions." And of course, it was because it meant he could talk about the issues of the day without being censored, because he could address things
Right.
as metaphor. But also to a kid watching it, it was just that's cool. Like the story, like a chilling sort of
Oh,
story, or it's got a mind-mangling twist, and that's just really cool. And I kind of and so that was the impetus, was to do something that was a bit like that, but about now. And then I kind of the more I thought about it, I thought, well, what would Rod Serling be writing about now? Well, it would be technology, and it would
and
be.
it would
But
be
again,
100%.
at the time, it was. So I at the time the show first at the time the show was first conceived, the
Hmm.
view of technology was very, very positive. Very
Right.
positive. I think generally we thought these iPhones and smartphones were
Hmm.
brilliant, and social media had helped bring about the Arab Spring, and it was going to usher in a new era of diplomacy and democracy, and we were all going to talk to each other. And the biggest complaint anyone had about social media was that it was full of people posting photos of their breakfast and talking about
Right.
minutiae in their life and being a little narcissistic, not unhinged. Not so. It wasn't this sort of unhinged vortex of anger and hatred. Um, but because it seemed so rosy, the portrayal of it seemed so rosy, and the it made me the anxious, neurotic person in me was immediately distrustful and scared.
Right.
If you see what I mean, because you kind of think
Well,
I'm the sort of
now
person. Yeah,
we've all flipped, right?
yeah,
Now everybody's negative on tech, right? There's a
mm,
general this is a there's a general concern, right? They're immediately just look at how I think we're all approaching AI. There's this immediate, are we
yeah,
sure? Because there's
yeah,
always a lot of, we don't want to do what we did with social media, where we were sort of, yay, this is awesome, right? Like, look
yeah,
at this, we're taking down dictators, and only to find out, whoa, dictators figured out how to use this
yeah.
themselves. Uh-oh. Um, do you think you're going to find yourself, if you're a zagger, and it sounds like you're a zagger, right? If everybody's going one way, you're like, okay, this is probably the time we need to show people what the other path might look like. Are you going to go optimist
Uh,
on us?
I'm probably more of a boring centrist in a way, in terms of like, so I can worry again, like I have a natural ability to worry about anything. I can leap over 5 lily pads over to immediate destruction and the apocalypse very quickly. You could show me a spoon, and I would worry about terrible things that someone could do with that spoon. Um, and so I can totally with AI, it's I can absolutely understand all the terrifying implications, and it's the unknown, isn't it? Really,
Right.
is we don't know,
Always.
but I you can also see, okay, there's myriad opportunities. It is an amazing tool, and we're not going to we, we can't really put the genie back in the bottle. We've invented this. Yes, I'm worried. I worry about, if you're in a kind of AI arms race, then obviously there's a an impetus to like, and people start thinking that guardrails are slowing them down. Then
Right.
this is a reason to, you know, dismantle any guardrails that there are. I think kind of like anything, the printing press was an amazing like one of the most amazing inventions in
Yeah.
history, caused all sorts of upheaval, because suddenly you had this way that ideas could be disseminated. Obviously, no one would say the printing press was a bad invention,
Right.
but
Oh,
I
well, my
guess,
favorite, what the
mm,
second, if the printing press was the single greatest invention to expand literacy to civilization,
mhm,
the number two most important invention were eyeglasses. So and
Right.
I it's not my idea. This was a fellow journalist who I was at this,
Mm.
we were talking about all these technological transformations, and somebody was mentioning the printing press, and then somebody mentioned the internet and computers and all this stuff, and it turned out, like, if you look back, the second most important invention for essentially literacy was
Right.
eyeglasses. Was the
I could
ability to
see
help
it.
people
Yes, I sort
see.
of
Yeah.
actually see what
Yeah.
was in
So you
front of
could
you.
read, right? And it was one of those moments you were like, well, duh. But you don't think, sometimes we don't think of
No, or that,
of
and
a,
actually,
yeah,
that's a good example of a extremely, in a way, very positively disruptive technology that
yeah.
probably did, obviously, clearly did a lot more harm than good. You can bet somebody put on a pair of eyeglasses and went, right, I don't like that guy over there that
Oh
I can
man,
now
I
see.
didn't realize
I
how
don't,
much I didn't like. Yeah, it ended a
I
lot of
don't like,
marriages.
I
Yeah.
don't like my neighbor. Yeah, so, so, but like, I guess with any of these, with AI, you can see that the potential is incredible. The
Yeah.
potential for it as a tool is incredible. The obvious worry I think that we all have is that guy going to take my job?
Right.
Is that guy going to take my job? And then is that guy going to run things from that? Is that guy going to be my boss? Not just take my job, but going to be my boss? And how do we manage that if that's the case? And I don't know, Jimmy. I don't. I think like any writer, you look at like something like ChatGPT, and it's worrisome.
Yep.
It's a worry, and you worry about um, replacing any. If we end up replacing, I mean, I'm talking creatively. If you end up
Yes.
replacing, if any creative work is is one human attempting to communicate with other humans, if you take the human out of one end of that pipe, I,
Right.
I don't know what you've got a different. I think you've got a different form. You've got a different thing
Let
that
me
I
ask
don't
you
know what
this.
that is. Mm.
Have you used any have you used AI to workshop or road test any of your ideas? Have you used
I
a chat GBT as sort of like a 10th writer in your writer room?
I think if you start replacing writers in your well, weirdly, we don't actually have a writing room on Black Mirror. We sometimes
Yeah,
have
what
written
do
like
you
there's
do?
been.
Like, tell me about like the pitch meetings. Like, how does that work?
Well, no, it's just I'm walking around occasionally. So I've collaborated with right. So we've done there's two of the episodes this
Hmm.
season are co-written, but we don't have like a formal writing room where people are sort of pitching
Hmm.
ideas and stuff. Usually, what's happening is I'm wandering around thinking, oh, I've got nuggets of idea, and then they'll sort of coalesce at some point, if that makes sense. Like
Right.
I'll suddenly,
Sure.
I'll think, oh, I know I want to do a story about this, and I want to do a story with, and here's a cool scene I've got this, or here's a moment I want to do, but
Yeah.
I don't know what the story is, and then I'll see something else, or I'll think of something, and that will cause me to
Hmm.
knit those ideas together. Now, whether I could regurgitate all those ideas into a AI and go, can you see connections between them? I probably could do that. Would it? Would it? That's a scary. Again, there's a
Yeah.
good Roald Dahl story about that, about an automated
Right.
writing machine with pedals for. There's a. That's a scary. Are you hastening your own demise
Yeah.
by doing that? Certainly, I can see. Obviously, when ChatGPT first launched, the first thing I did was you say to it, "Come on, then, tell me a Black Mirror type idea," and it started coming out with something that initially you go, "Oh God, that's
That's
okay,
pretty
that
good.
sounds plausible."
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
That's well, it sounded plausible, but it was also the more. So you get an immediate as you're watching the sentences come in, you have an immediate like, oh, Jesus Christ, like, oh my God, this is. I'm watching myself get dismantled
Yes.
in real. I'm
And
watching the death of my career in real time, and then you go, actually, oh, actually, no, this isn't that good. This is generic, and it's formulaic. Oh, and I see this feels like um, a lukewarm,
right.
not very interesting pitch that actually is just cobbled together from fragments of because it's a bit like the
Well, it doesn't
it's
work. I
actually
think it doesn't work if there's not a human creative element. I think that's what we're going to learn.
I think so, but I hope so, and I think that we'll always want it. That's the other thing. I think we'll always want that. The
Oh,
thing is,
I'm convinced we're going to have to start paying extra for human customer service. Like I hate AI customer service, right? You feel like they don't know. You get the automated chats or the automated
Mhm.
this, and then you're like, representative, or you hit your zero, whatever it is, and you have to wait longer to get a human being. I actually think some business is going to say, hey, why don't we charge people
To
basically
talk
because
to a
they want
human.
to talk to a human?
But how will you know you're talking to a human? That's the problem, isn't
Well,
it? At the
that's a
moment,
great
it's
question. You're
because you
right.
get, well, at the moment, it's because you get the equivalent of a sort of novelty key fob that presses, that
Right.
makes four sound effects. That's your like when they're rubbish and you're talking to one and it's just going, oh, I'm sorry to hear that you feel that you're cross. Have you tried looking it up on
Yeah.
our website? And it's a sort of chat bot. That's
Right.
frustrating. When
Very
you've got
frustrating.
one, but you're within by next year, you'll probably have one that within 6 minutes you'll be
Yeah.
telling it your deepest, darkest secrets and confiding in it. Because I mean, they're basically like Eliza, which was that was the first sort of AI chatbot. Was this thing
Right.
Eliza, wasn't it? That
Mm.
was the '60s, late '60s, something like that, and it was designed to be a sort of to just do what a basic psychologist would do, and it would just mirror back what you said to it. And there's a sort of famous anecdote about the guy who created Eliza asked his secretary to test it out, and
Yeah.
within about 20 minutes, she asked him to leave the room because she was telling it things that were private. And all that was a very basic bit of code that would go, "Hello, what's your name?" And you'd say, "My name's Charlie," and it would say, "How are you feeling today?" And you go, "Quite sad," and it would go, "Oh, Charlie, why are you feeling quite sad?" And then before you know it, you're just
Confessing
regurgitating
everything.
your soul.
Yeah.
And so they'll probably get to that point where you'll pay not to speak to a human, and
Wow.
you'll be
Yeah.
speaking to a you'll be being psycho, you'll be sharing your deepest secrets with an AI therapist who's available 24 hours a day.
So if I didn't know you, I would assume you were a privacy nut. Like you're obsessed with privacy because I would argue a lot of your episodes deal with the issue of
Riff on
privacy.
that a little.
Yeah.
I think you're right, but also like people get shocked when I say we've got like an Amazon Alexa device in the
No,
house.
you're
We've
right.
got
I
like
am already
yeah.
shocked at how much of a tech advocate you are because you're right. If I didn't know you, this is what you do, you'd be like, well, this guy's probably off the grid. He probably has
Right.
the aluminum foil on the doors.
Oh, I'm not the Unabomber. No, people
Okay.
often think it's like me in a yes, in a wooden shack with foil. Yeah, like you say, foil around
Always
every
foil. There's
surface.
always foil. Yeah.
Always foil. But that would if I was sitting there, my computers wouldn't work. I'd be so sad. And so I mean, I wouldn't say. I mean, the problem is I don't think that I really do worry. I really worry about, obviously, in the creative industries, I massively worry about what AI could do.
Yes.
As in terms of it's already a tight time, it's already a challenging environment, you might say, and it could wreak real human havoc very quickly. I can also see y- y- why it's going to be do you mean someone's going to do a movie that's using this generate like when Toy Story came
Right.
out and it was the first CGI animated cartoon and everyone went, "Oh, wow, you can do that? Wow, okay." And it sort of um we didn't lose the art of hand-drawn animation, but it meant that the default for animated films became
Doesn't it, in
CGI.
fairness, doesn't every technological advancement put somebody's career, get rid of some sort of,
Yeah. Mm,
refrigeration? We used to have people that worked in the ice block industry,
right.
who literally cut
Yes.
blocks of ice, right? We had refrigeration and you didn't need the block of
Mhm.
ice people anymore. Now, there was probably a lot of people lamenting that those jobs were gone. Oh my God,
Mm.
automation is replacing jobs, right? I'm being I mean, I would argue this is sort of a repetitive cycle when it comes to any technological advancement.
It is. I suppose the worry comes when when it's all jobs. That's the problem. When it's
Yeah.
basically when it's when it's all careers or jobs, or not all careers or jobs, because I have no idea how this stuff will pan out. Do you know what I mean? I don't actually know, but it's uh how we find it's beyond even the financial, obviously, the financial impact and how you run
Mhm.
society, like purpose, just how we find purpose and meaning in what
Right.
we do if a lot of what we do is replicated tirelessly by a system, um, I don't really know what that does to us psychologically. So I think it's a, and again, you could argue, well, maybe I only am worrying about it now because, I'm a writer and I feel like that's under threat.
Right. Right.
And again, I can see the value in it as like you say, as a tool. I can see the value in as a tool
You
in
know,
the
we don't
way that an
teach.
artist
I
would
don't think we
use
teach. We
Photoshop.
don't teach spelling anymore. And I was like spelling test. I loved and I was obsessed as a kid. I'm in my 50s now. Of course,
Ah,
spell check happened probably after college. And then all of a sudden now
okay.
we don't care about you can't misspell words anymore because of autocorrect. Like people I- and so I don't know what to make of that, but that is
Is that
something
an
that no
American
longer is
thing?
relevant. Yeah,
Sorry,
spelling.
now is that an American thing? Because like in Britain, my kids, I remember them. They got taught so much about spelling and like phrases. I didn't know what that like. They come home and go, "Oh, I've got to do this
Well,
homework about
once
trigraphs and
again, it's like
digraphs," and
no
I was
wonder
like, "What
everybody
the
thinks the
heck?"
British are smarter than we are. There you go. You guys are
Well,
still being taught spelling.
I don't know that we are. I think we're probably not being taught all sorts of other things about British history or whatever. I don't
But
know,
you get my
but
point. Like spelling is no longer, there was a time, right? If you weren't a good speller,
mhm.
you were uncomfortable even writing a letter. You would get,
Yes,
you would worry that it would create a judgment of you, and
yeah,
people would, oh, you're not a good speller, you're not educated.
yeah.
And now,
You don't
we've
worry
got the
about that
tools. You don't
because.
worry about it,
Mhm.
right? And is that have we taken away something from society? And again,
Well, it seems like a
I
net
don't know.
plus. That does. That feels
Right,
because you're probably. It means that you're not. There'll be people who were held back by the fact that they were dyslexic or they weren't good at one thing and they were excelled at
right.
something else, and now it levels the playing field a little more. So that's a good thing. But again, I think the problem is that we're sort of trained. We're naturally sort of analyze everything and think, is this good or bad? And the answer is it's
Right.
kind of both, isn't it? So again, if
Well, in the wrong
AI,
hands, right? It turns out
yeah,
it's neutral, right? That's what we ought to
yeah.
think of it. All technology is neutral.
Mm.
It's the humans that use it. Are they using
Like a
it for good or
hammer.
using
I
it for
mean,
bad?
a
Right.
hammer is a powerful, very useful tool. It can also be a terrifying
Right.
implement of death.
Or a
So,
knife.
a
Yeah.
knife. I mean, we could list. You could list
Yeah.
every tool in the in that wheelhouse,
Yes.
and the wheel. Someone could drive around their house and kick the door in. So it is. It's just that it's the pace of it, the dizzying speed with which these things are
Hmm.
coming along, I think, is the thing that makes people rightly anxious. But it is exciting, but it's also terrifying at the
I'd
same
say another
time. So
theme. Let me ask you about another theme that does seem to come through. Consumerism
mm.
is something you seem to enjoy. Is that more of a comedic element to you, or also a
It's
worry?
often a darkly committed because one of the I think I mentioned the Twilight Zone. I mentioned sort of weird British TV shows, and I think one of the things that, and I've realized recently how much it influenced Black Mirror. Robocop, the 1980, like
Uh,
87, was it? Like
yes.
Robocop, the original
And
Robocop.
I'm so glad you brought that is a weirdly brilliant movie. People
It's
don't
a
fully
it's
appreciate it. It's a brilliant movie
it's
ahead of its time.
way ahead of its time. It's a brilliant comedy as well. It's like
Yes.
a really
Yeah.
dark comedy in a way that I loved it when I was like a teenager. I saw it
Hmm.
and wore the VHS out watching it over and over again. And I think a lot of the comedy sailed over my head. But the sort of the dystopian commodification of everything that was going on in that was excellently done. I have to say, as a Brit, it was clearly very heavily influenced by Judge Dredd, which was
Hmm.
a British
Oh,
comic strip, which
what do you mean they
dystopian.
took and they Judge
Basically the
Dredd was
same.
made into a movie a couple years
Yes,
later because of the success of
yes.
RoboCop. Yes.
But there's always been something I think at heart, and again, this is not what I sit down thinking when coming up with a Black Mirror story. I don't think this is what I want to write about. It's looking back, you go, oh, that's what it's about. Almost every episode is about what's real and authentic in some way, you could
Yeah.
argue. Almost every episode we do, ultimately that's it, whether it's a story where it's people cast into a sort of VR simulation of something,
Right.
or it's um, a character who is suddenly having to spout sales pitches in her everyday life. It's kind of always about what's authentic, and that's something that's kind of under assault all the time.
Well, look, I think one of the other brilliant things you do is um, here you're dealing with a bunch of futuristic ideas, but the setting always feels right now, right? You
Hopefully.
don't you're always, I feel like you're basically saying, hey, this is a little bit in the future, but but we're going to make sure everything else is as familiar as possible. So
Mhm.
you have the beaten up Volvo, right, in
Yes.
episode one, and sort
Yeah.
of things in some ways things were the same. The
Yeah.
place you go get a crappy burger and things like this.
Mhm.
But then you have these little grace notes like the honeybees, which I know
Yes.
is a theme,
Mhm.
and a few other things. It seemed very intentional. This is seasonal. You've always wanted to keep. You don't ever put people. You don't try to create futuristic landscapes. I've noticed.
No, we don't. I suppose it's because, again, it's usually, even when we've done stories where there's a hugely, we're taking huge liberties with what
Hmm.
is, we're showing things that probably will never quite be possible, or we're showing people kind of uploading their souls, or you kind of always want to keep one foot on the ground. I think that's just my personal taste is more the Robocop end of sci-fi than it is the Star Wars end of sci-fi, which is more a
Gotcha.
space opera in a far-flung future, and
Yeah.
it's more akin to fantasy. So I'm more sort of that kind of um, oh, this could happen at the end of my street if
Right.
things go badly wrong. I, I tend to respond more to that, I think, as a viewer, and so that's probably why that's where we probably operate most strongly.
Do
Hmm.
you do you do you try to meet with innovators in Silicon Valley and tech entrepreneurs to try to find out what's coming and have it
No.
or are you is this are you just sort of saying, it's possible we'll start replacing the pieces of the brain, and this is probably how we'll be able to stop, you know, glioblastoma or whatever it is. They'll take it
Mhm.
out and be able to replace this. Is that just you guessing, or do you
It's
talk
me.
to experts that give you, well, this could be what we do?
It's predominantly me guessing. Basically, it's me guessing or extrapolating, or usually you're not even thinking of technology when you start thinking about it. You're thinking of
Yeah,
something else, and then you realize that you can give it would almost be a supernatural story, except you can give it a sort of technological explanation. We did an episode last season. We did an episode called "Joan is Awful," where it's this woman called Joan, played by Annie Murphy, switches on the TV and sees there's a streaming platform that's
yes,
showing a dramatization of her life, starring Salma Hayek, and that's a very Twilight Zone story
yes,
in
it
many ways.
was.
In the Twilight Zone, it would have been like magic, or it would have been the uncanny. We can sort of say it's AI deepfake video.
Hmm.
It's that. So you're sort of coming at it from that angle. I probably should go and speak to more sort
Hmm.
of tech, because sometimes there's things where I've put it in the episode thinking I'm being very clever here, and then you
Yeah,
realize, oh, it's actually like the honeybees. We did an episode in season 3 called Hated in the Nation, which is where we first had these autonomous drone miniature honeybees that were going
yeah,
around replacing. Because I'd read something about honeybees dying out
right,
and colony collapse, and then I thought, oh well, what if you had little miniature drone ones that could fly around and
right.
um, pollinate flowers? And I thought I was being very clever, and then discovered that I think that experiment had been running for
I was just
like
gonna
eight
say,
years.
are there stuff that you've done? You're like, oh wow, I didn't. Beside, that you just either that or you foreshadowed something.
The well, the most unusual one. Well, there's a list. There's definitely okay. So there's an episode we did back in season 2 called "Be
Hmm.
Right Back," where it's Haley Atwell and Donald Gleason, and Haley plays this woman called Martha whose husband dies in an accident.
Mm.
It's almost a companion piece to Common People this season.
Yep.
And anyway, she's missing him. She's discovered she's pregnant. She's desperate to just be able to, if only he knew this, only she could talk to him.
Yeah.
She's offered this service which allows her to communicate with him from, and it's an AI that's based on his social media
Right.
um, output. I didn't realize at the time it felt to me like something that would become possible. I didn't realize how closely that mimics what
Well,
large language models and that's
well,
now a service.
oh, not only
Mm.
that, I happen to be very involved in various ways to how do we educate people about the Holocaust and things like that. And there's what they're going to do is they've taken all of these historical oral histories that Holocaust survivors have
Mhm.
done, and they're essentially going to generate, even though they've passed on, they're still going to tell you their story, and then you're going to be able to
Right.
interact with them and have a
And you mean
conversation, literally
literally speak.
speak and
Mhm.
respond. And it's going to be a lot where you have a back and forth with a Holocaust survivor, and
Wow.
you ask questions, and the AI based on, I mean, it's one of those. At first, you think it's dystopian, but you know what? That's an interesting. Are we gonna? Will Albert Einstein?
Yeah.
Well, forget Albert Einstein. How about this? Because this is probably more recent. Because will Steve Jobs teach a computer science class? AI Steve Jobs teach a computer science class in 2035?
That's difficult, isn't it? Because what you're describing there, that sounds like the high tech equivalent of. It's like when um you could read the diaries of Samuel Pepys in the sort of whatever
Yeah.
century, and suddenly that period of history becomes alive, and you feel because you're hearing somebody's
And then
thoughts
you
in the moment.
create what you think his voice might have looked like, and you have his image, and then all of a sudden, there you go.
I can see that where he's recounting what happened to him.
Yeah.
If you're talking about rebuilt, like Steve Jobs, would would he have left enough information behind for you to get
Right.
his how he would innovate ideas and how he would create things? I don't know. I hadn't really thought about the educational uses um, of that as a platform, but
I mean, I guess I
that
look
is
at the
quite
Holocaust
fascinating.
survivors
Mm.
telling their story to children who can ask questions. That feels like, okay, that's a good thing. You can see how that
Yeah.
tool, you know, where does, where do you say, okay, that's where we use it, and that's it, right? Like, or where
Yeah.
does that become weird, right? Where does, especially if you actually know that person, if that's your grandmother, are you having a different reaction
Well,
having this?
how does it work in
Yeah,
terms of like if somebody, what's the parameters for the conversation? What happens if somebody's just sort of talking
I
about,
don't,
what if
that's
they
a great
start asking for
question.
advice in
Right.
their own life? And then, because what you see very quickly when people talk to like, chatbots, effectively AIs,
Yeah.
is they
Right.
get attached very quickly. Generally, they can become confidants very
Yeah.
quickly. So, yeah, I
And we
don't know
wonder
how, well, you're going to,
why these by the way, we wonder why these Nigerian princes are so successful at getting money out of people, right? I mean,
right.
it is amazing. We human beings are oddly trusting uh in isolated settings
But isn't
when we're
that a good
isolated.
thing that we trust? Isn't that nice
Yeah.
about us? Isn't our
Yeah, as long as
if
we're not
we
being taken advantage of. Yeah.
well, it's the you don't want to become. Why am I saying you don't want to become too cynical? But it's no. So I can again. It's interesting that you can. That's interesting. That's a use I hadn't really thought about. But it's bringing history alive,
Yeah.
and bringing and making it personal in a way that feels to me like that's interesting. But again, there's so many things to navigate there,
Yeah.
and
Oh
so
yeah.
many ways that could kind of veer into places you didn't anticipate. That's the sort of, you see, this is why tech companies, I think, like what you were saying, my sometimes occasionally when I've like spoken at sort of events where there's bit like my advice whenever I'm asked, well, what should tech companies do? I think employ comedy writers is my advice. Employ neurotic comedy writers who are going to, or horror writers, or just dramatic writers. Employ them
Yeah.
to sit in a room and work out the worst way. What are the
The
on
worst ways that
darkly
people, right. Yeah.
what was the worst that could happen? because I think often um, people who just people who innovate in a different way, they probably have to blank that out when they're. Do you know what I mean? Like on some, like inventors probably have to not think about that too
Oh,
much
I think
in order to
that's
push
yeah,
forward.
right. I always worry about this with Silicon Valley. I think right now there is a movement in Silicon Valley where they think we humans are standing in the way of their progress.
Right.
Right, where we as human beings simply, if we
With
could
the
just get out of the way, right? Democracy
with the
stands in the
awkward
way.
flesh
Right.
breaks on the
Yes.
wonderful digital utopia that they will usher in, as if we could just shut up and lie down and
Right.
let the computery steamroller just plow all over us. That's kind
Oh,
of
no.
losing sight of what the point of it all is, isn't it? I mean,
Correct. It was
that's
supposed to make
yeah,
us our lives better rather than essentially replacing us. But let me get one more thing. Let me get you out of here on
yeah,
this. We brought back the dire wolf, and I'll be
right.
honest with you, at that I feel like that story came out just when your season hit. And there was a
Hmm.
minute I'm like, are we making this up? Is this like
Right.
sometimes like where we're headed with our abilities here? And it's like, granted, this
Hmm.
is Jurassic Park, right? This is Michael Crichton. Michael Crichton was thinking about this stuff, who I also think weirdly is sort of underappreciated in his sort of ability to sort of see
Oh,
some dystopian things down the road.
again, some really great speculative, like, do you know what I mean? Like just some great sort of
Yeah.
and tied to really patchy stories. Do you know what I mean?
Right. But here we are with
Yeah.
the dire wolf,
Mhm.
and you're just sitting there going, yeah, there's not going to be an unintended consequence to this. I mean,
Yes,
Jesus.
I do. I think so, but it's you can't. Again, it's like I am not a luddite. I can't embrace I'm not the. I'm like I say. I'm probably in a worried centrist when it comes to
Hmm.
the tech and the future. In that I am an admirer of technology. I appreciate it. I'm awestruck by it. I like it. I fear it, and I fear the consequences of us clumsily misusing it. But that's not a reason to not. It's just really difficult. And the problem is we're living in a again. It's we're living through. If the printing press caused all sorts of
Right.
ruptures, we're living through a sort of accelerated process of that. But again, it will feel normal. Is it like it's felt? How long would you say things have felt dizzyingly futuristic? Like,
Well,
do you
it
know
all
what I mean?
depends
Like,
on your age. I think we're in
yeah,
middle age. And I think when you're in, I
yes,
always say middle age is weirdly peak wisdom, both good and bad,
right,
right? You sort of, you've learned enough life lessons to know what you shouldn't be doing, but
yes.
you're not yet, you haven't lost it. Like, at some point, I always want to
Mhm.
know what age it is. Is it 72? Is it 70? Where you start to, you no longer are sort of
Are
see,
grounded.
right. You're sort of,
You've lost that. You not haven't got the benefit of hindsight, and well, you
right.
haven't got the benefit of wisdom. You're just sort of set in your ways and
Right.
cranky.
And
Right,
because you know you're out, if you were a an animal, you'd already be put out to pasture. I think that's what
right.
happens, right? It's
Well, there's
something
a
in the head
day.
there.
There's a day you wake up one day
Yeah,
and that's
and it's
happened
like
to you.
right, like because it's
This
like
is quite a Black Mirror concept you're outlining here. Is that
uh,
one day it's like you get, I'm
what if
sorry,
you actually
no,
know
it's
what day
cranky
it
old
is?
man day for you. Sorry.
What if you know the day? Like I always say, at what point am I going to want to go to the airport 4 hours in advance? Like my mother
Right.
never was that person. And then suddenly she's listening now. I'm sure, Mom, I love you, but you always want to be at the airport way too
Oh,
long.
I'm
I
the
don't know
opposite.
why you want to sit there so long, but I
I'm that.
assume when I'm 70 or so, I'm going to be worried about that too.
I, you know what? I've always been. I am that person, and I've always been that. I'm the person who has to get to the airport really, really early,
Oh,
even though, like,
I'm afraid of
I
having any downtime at the airport. I think
well,
I'm wasting time.
no, you're not.
Mm.
No, because well, I think it's because I used to be a really nervous flyer, and it was the one.
Ah,
Do you know what I mean? So I think it's that. It's a control
the
thing. It's like
acclimated. You needed to get acclimated. Yeah.
I
To
wanted to. Yes, exactly. So I needed to feel like it
Mhm.
wasn't suddenly sprung on me that I had to run and catch a plane. But no. So I again I think that it's things. It feels like there's a sort of dizzying pace of change, and that's incredibly destabilizing. And I have no idea how it's going to pan out. But yes, my kids are. I've got a 13-year-old and an 11-year-old, both boys, and they
It's all normal to
take all
them.
of this in their stride. Yeah, they're totally
Yeah.
like,
Mine are 18 and 21, and it's,
right.
it's all very normal. And I
Yeah,
look at some of this stuff going, boy, this is abnormal, but they don't know my normal. They
no,
didn't know this stuff, they didn't know the fax machine, whatever it is.
yeah. So they'll be much better at. You hope. Well, this is the thing. So obviously, because it feels like the next thing, apart from AI coming to take all our jobs, or not, or make us super bad, is a sort of huge wave of sort of misinformation, fake video, just dividing us even more than we are already. Where
Yeah.
there's already competing versions of reality, and those are both now going to have 24-hour visuals to
Right.
go with them that
Who
will
do you
be very
blame for that?
persuasive.
Who's
Who do I
more of the bad
blame?
actor here?
Us.
Is it political leaders or tech CEOs? Like who's to blame for this moment we're living in where it's been exploited like this? The
Uh,
exploiters or the ones that make the tool for the exploitation?
is it all right to blame everyone or
Yeah,
both
I
of
think it
them?
is.
I
Yes.
think it's not, because again, it wouldn't. It's so. But again, will that mean that the next generation? Will it mean just that what happens when? Because at the same time, also you're seeing videos where someone you could see a video where somebody turned into a plate of spaghetti and meatballs sort of thing. So that things can be like, it can be surreal and strange, but
Right.
completely photographically convincing. But it couldn't have. So will the next generation just learn to not trust anything at
Well, that's
all?
my great fear is that everybody's going to turn in. If you ever talk to a Russian in
Mhm.
in Moscow, they'll say, "I don't know what to believe." People that live in
Right.
Moscow don't believe anything, right? Because they've
Yeah.
been so, and in some ways they know this though. They're educated to know enough to know, oh yeah, I don't trust anything I read. So I get
So
that. I
how
worry
do they
about
stay
that.
sane on a
I don't know. And
local
and
basis?
and my great fear of
Because
AI is that we could actually erase history now. There was supposedly a bunch of Russian propagandists who were trying to infiltrate these chatbots to sort of replace Ukrainian, to try to essentially alter the history of Russia's relationship with Ukraine in history,
gotcha.
and then you create, and over time, you know, if you
That's very
infiltrate the right,
1984, isn't it? To
right,
bring
isn't
it,
it?
yeah,
Right.
yeah,
You
yeah.
can actually
Hmm.
erase historical events, right? And it's
Yeah.
whether that's the Holocaust, whether that's
Hmm.
something else. That
Yeah.
that
That's
dystopia
terrifying.
certainly, yeah, that's terrifying. It can be.
That's terrifying, and I don't know. I don't know how that isn't. I hate to say likely, but I don't know how that
Well, if you have
doesn't.
the Chinese government controls information, so
Mhm.
there's no Tiananmen Square. There's no history of what happened at Tiananmen Square if you live in China.
Well, and there's
They just
already a lot of
erased it.
people who believe we're already there and that everything is a lie and that everything so
Yeah.
yeah, I don't no, that worries me. If there's no consensus on what
Hmm.
is real or has been real, how do we cope with giant climate problems that are going to come our way? How do we cope with
Right.
when there's big a big problem? I like I say, I'm an anxious sort of. I can be an anxious apocalyptic worrier. When the pandemic happened, I was sort of comparatively calm because I thought we were handling it quite well. Like in many ways,
By the way, thank you for saying that.
yeah.
I think
Mm.
that too. I know we all look back and there was lots to COVID
It
we
was
didn't like and
horrible.
all
It
this stuff.
wasn't. Yeah, it wasn't like it was a laugh, but it was. Yeah, but
But
we.
but the globe, I mean, here's this event that
Mm,
all 9 billion people on this planet experienced together.
mm,
And that's something that's unusual. If you think about it,
yeah.
where we all, everybody had experienced this in some way, whether you lived
Mhm,
in a very in a very sort of frankly urban life,
mhm,
rural life,
mhm,
reclusive life, it didn't matter, right?
mhm.
Everybody had to deal with this. And I'm
Well, we
with
meant we
you.
all had a reclusive life.
Right.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
know,
Mm.
it could have been total breakdown of
Chaos.
society, and we didn't have that. And that
That
we should be happy with ourselves for that.
that side of things was that we were all worried, and we all, you generally speaking, people were. it felt looking out for each other. You had the young staying indoors to protect the elderly. You had sort of, you had actually more
And there were some cranky people about it,
self-sacrifice, and yeah,
but they
but
didn't
we
like
didn't.
take matters into their own hands. Yes, we had bad arguments and stuff,
Mhm.
but within a civilized guardrail.
There's more arguments about it now. It's
Yes,
but it's so in a way
you're right. It's hopeful. It was a
that's
hopeful
in
response,
a way it
weirdly.
was sort of like it wasn't do you know what I mean? We so you'd sort of hope that we when faced because we are resort again, I'm not the voice of optimism, but we are pretty incredible creatures.
Oh, I
We
think
create incredible
we're so
things.
resilient. We're so
It's pretty
resilient.
good. And
Yeah.
so we're just going to have to navigate that world. And so how I don't know how we counter a sort of cynical destruction of all sort of
Yeah.
consensus on what reality is. I don't know. You sort of have to hope that we won't just end up tearing each other's flesh and fighting in the streets, sort of thing. You have to hope that. And again, we didn't do we could have done. The pandemic could have been a
Yeah.
shitload worse than
Yep.
we could have behaved in a much more
Uh,
venal way. Mm.
Charlie, I have to say, I'm so happy you have this optimistic streak in you.
But
I did. I
maybe
was worried
maybe
you
it's
were
just
this, or I just got you at a good day.
gloomy. Well,
Yeah.
no, I think. Well, no, don't get me wrong. I can absolutely have total moments of complete and utter staring into the abyss, sort of awake at 4 a.m.
Right.
The sort of carnival of horrible thoughts going through your head, and you worry desperately about your children, and you worry desperately about the future and where are things going. So I can absolutely do all of that, and oddly, the more of us who are worried, the better.
Oh, I
I
agree.
think
I agree with
the
that.
thing. I think that was the thing with the pandemic that really struck me was I was I'm one of these people who, as soon as the first reports, I remember I was on holiday over Christmas when that happened.
Yeah.
There were reports of like there's this illness,
There's something going around. Right.
something
Yeah.
on, there's a virus, there's something respiratory illness in China, and like blah blah.
Yeah.
Blah. And I thought that's going to come in, that's going to sweep, that's good. We're going to get that. I don't like the look of that, and I was really worried about it. At the point when everyone was worried about it, I can kind of the dread in me drops a little because there's nothing more scary than thinking everyone else is being blasé and complacent about something
Yeah.
that's worrying you. It's the wasp at the picnic that no one else is. I'm the one who can't relax if there's one wasp at the picnic. And if everyone's worried about the wasp, you
Yeah.
move the bloody picnic blanket somewhere else,
Right.
or someone catches it in a glass. And so you kind of have to hope that our survival instinct will realize that we need more of us. We need as many of us as possible to survive, and that I don't know.
Um,
Um,
are
mm.
you gonna? Is this ever stop in your head? Do you think you'll always
This
be
show or
this
this
show?
society
Yeah,
and the
this
world.
show.
I would I'd like to think it's something that can keep going, can keep morphing, can keep. We keep I keep changing. I keep doing different types of episodes. We've done a sequel for the first time. We've done an interactive one a few
Hmm.
years ago. You can do sort of feature length ones and short ones. So I kind of think it's something that can be that can be very reactive to what's going on.
To the
It's
zeitgeist.
a
Yeah.
it hopefully it's a weird, it's like I say, it's a very odd show to do. I'm aware that also it's a bit like being in a band where we did a load of punk singles early on, and so you get some sort of fans who just want you to do punk singles, but we also
Yes.
did some that are a bit more like big love ballads or something that were also really popular. And so
Mm.
now you're kind of trying to, so I have to not. I think my mental trick is to not think too much about what fans of the show expect, and just
Yeah.
try to write what
Well,
I'm interested in the
that's
moment.
audience capture, right? You have to be worried. You don't
Audience,
that you're worried
yeah.
that are you making something to please the audience versus are you making something to advance your mind, your thoughts
And
on this thing?
we have because it's we don't tend to have the same characters from episode to episode. We have less of that in that people don't like. Usually, our characters are absolutely broken by the time the credits roll.
Yes, they
So
are.
people don't quite. it's a different dynamic, I guess, from on a big, like Game of Thrones or
Mhm.
like some huge show
So
like
it
that
just sounds
with.
like you'll always have an ambition to keep this going, and there'll always be, and certainly
As
there's
long
always
as people
material.
will, as long as that I can keep coming up with ideas and people keep wanting to look at them, and as long as I don't get out competed by some AI, as long as they're not
Right.
just staring into some holographic box in a few years, like just shouting, and that's just staring at them and looking at their facial expression and thinking, here's an image you'll like to see for the next 2 seconds, and they're just sort of seeing some kind of constant deep fake three-dimensional TikTok that's
Yeah.
being blasted at them, which is probably 95% certain to happen, as long as
Oh,
I
I'm
still have a
worried you just
career.
created. I'm worried somebody's going to start Dum Dums really soon. I mean, in some ways, OnlyFans is kind of like that,
Well,
kind of
again, we did
already.
this thing. We did this thing, yeah, in the Common People episode. Like Chris O'Dowd's character Mike has to pay. He just to try and pay for this subscription by kind of debasing himself on this online platform. Again, I didn't realize that there was. As soon as the episode came out, a bunch of people went, "Oh, that's this."
Yeah.
I can't remember what it was called. That's this thing where people were doing that for sort of Bitcoin or
Yes.
something. And so nothing new under the sun.
Hey,
Yeah,
there's no new ideas. There's just better packaged ones, right?
that's very cynical, but probably accurate.
That's what
Mm.
ChatGPT will eventually tease us. Hey, without the
But
pandemic, we don't specialize in doing these incredible Zoom telecasts now,
oh
and
yeah, no,
YouTube is half
that's
of what
yeah,
it is, right? Like we will look
yeah.
back at this moment. It actually
It was a
created this.
moonshot. It
Yes.
was like a moonshot. Expect it was like having to come up with ballpoint pens
And
because
everybody had to come up with a yeah.
astronauts needed to be right in space. So yeah, and it made all sorts of things. Um, it was a big, but also I don't think we still unpacked actually psychologically what it did to us all.
Oh,
We're
well, look, I
not
mean,
close to doing that. Mm.
and we're seeing in schools with kids. I mean, look,
Yeah,
there's no one saying, we're saying
it was
there,
great. No,
I know, I don't, we
yeah,
know there was bad,
Mm.
but it was sort of like, hey, the more important thing is we adapted, right? We
Yes,
adapted and we
yes.
survived, and we ought to at least not sell ourselves short on that.
No, we're a bit better than. Again, it's like the thing that struck me was how the number of times you'd see and I'd written a zombie movie where it's like within
Mhm.
society collapses within 20 minutes
Right.
basically of this sort of calamity, and that isn't what happened. Like
No.
in the pandemic scenario, that isn't what happened. We were out in Britain, we were out banging saucepans every Thursday in support of the NHS. um,
Right.
Although I did read somebody was saying, I think that was actually us banging the saucepans to sort of let other people know we were still there, which made me quite sad. When I read that, it was probably a more accurate read. Anyway,
Charlie, I
yes.
will I've you've been very generous with your time. Black Mirror is just it's I don't think there's any AI could have come up with this as a reminder that
Yet,
it takes a creative brain to come up with ideas.
I hope so. I hope we'll always want messy humans in our
Yes.
creative soup. I don't know if that analogy makes sense, but that's what I've said. Hmm.
Well, it's brilliant. And whether you mean to have us think in dystopian ways or not, the point is you make everybody think. And that's
Oh,
all
thank
that
you.
matters. That's all to me that matters. You're making us think.
Good. Oh, well, thank you very much. Oh, thank you, sir. That's very kind.
Well, there you go.
That's,
We got to
yeah.
end on an upbeat note. Little hope and
Good.
optimism. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. A pleasure.
Great to talk with you. Thank you, Charlie. So I told you you'd enjoy that interview with Charlie Brooker. He is fascinating. That mind is racing. And I don't know if you had Robocop and Twilight Zone. I'm sure many of you assumed Twilight Zone and Rod Serling was one of his inspirations. But you bet you didn't see Robocop coming. And the minute he said it, I knew exactly what he meant. Go check it out. The first Robocop was sort of more innovative than I think people gave it credit for at the time. So anyway, it was just I learned a lot, and frankly, it only makes me enjoy the show even more. I hope you got a lot out of it too. All right, let's do a little Ask Chuck.
Ask Chuck.
All right, here's my first question. This one comes from Chaz Latore. And he writes this: you advocate news in every small town community. That's interesting. But if news was generated locally, wouldn't it just turn into an echo chamber for the local community? For example, I come from a very left-leaning town in Pennsylvania. Wouldn't their news cast just be an echo chamber where the word Trump would never even make it to a news broadcast? It seems like it would just be a lot of local Fox News channels that echo what the local community wants to hear. I would think a broader national broadcast would be more balanced. What am I missing here? Well, there is no broadcast balance, right? As we know, if you're looking for national news, you're going to go and you're looking for news, you're going to go where you have where you share some where there's some intellectual agreement. What I'm advocating is not local versions of Fox or MSNBC. That is not what I'm advocating. What I'm advocating is that we basically need a different, what local news was at its best. And I understand that some people probably, it's been 25 years since we've had a healthy local news ecosystem, arguably. So some of you may not have been around or didn't fully appreciate it. But what I would say is we need more service journalism, and local journalism was more in service of the community than national journalism. National journalism is about essentially, helping you be a citizen, your civics. But local journalism at its best is about helping you live your life. And that's what I mean. What we need is revitalized community journalism that is focused more on helping you live your life, focused on how to save you money at the grocery store, how to save you money to take your kids out to eat, if there's a better night of the week. It's being essentially almost like a community liaison. My vision for these small town and all of these community information systems is that you become the information help desk for your community. And that could mean helping people find out when the high school lacrosse game starts this afternoon, helping people where to find it. I think I want these places to be the streaming home for all of youth sports and high school sports. This is what I believe can be the glue to bring a community together. I also see sports as a way that you can sort of cut through red and blue. And because most, a pothole isn't Republican or Democrat, it's a pothole, so that's my belief here. That's what I know people tell me that they want. Whenever you ask, this is what people feel like is missing. So I am a believer a little bit in the field of dreams here. If we build it, they will come. But it needs to be journalism that is focused on helping people live their life. And I always say, where's the cheap food? Give me some micro forecasting for my community versus the one right next door when it comes to the weather. Access to all the important youth and local sports that I care about. And oh, by the way, who's corrupt in my city council? And so, but it's actually that part is the end part of things, right? People who want to be informed are always going to get informed. It's about everybody else in the community. Those are folks that are just trying to get by, live their life. Either they're not news junkies or they've got other things in their life that take priority, like making a living, educating their kids, etc. How about coverage for that, right? That's the missing piece of this, is that it's not about creating more local political news, although I hope we get that too. But I'm starting in the places where I know there's collective agreement and where I know there's collective need. Chaz, appreciate the question and love the skepticism because it gave me a chance to push back. Ask Chuck. This comes from Josh in Ohio. And Josh writes, you've talked a lot about the possibility of the Republican Party splitting between more traditional Republicans and MAGA Republicans. If that were to happen, who would be in the traditional wing? It seems like MAGA has completely taken over the party, so name some names. Look, I think MAGA has taken over the sort of the organizational structure of the party. There's no doubt about it. But I mean, look, the people that are in elective office who are clearly not MAGA Republicans, but essentially are trying to be MAGA adjacent, right? And I think many of the MAGA adjacent folks would prefer to be in the pre-Donald Trump party. That's people like Tom Cotton. That's people like Tom Tillis, Bill Cassidy, Lisa Murkowski for sure, right? Mitt Romney, Chris Sununu. So I think to me, I might even say Lindsey Graham, although I think he's a little more finger in the wind. of where our South Carolina Republican's going to go is where he's going to go. But and I think some of these Republicans that have sort of gone back and forth with that. But I think there really is a question about, is MAGA bigger than Trump? Right? That's still the basic question. Is it bigger than Trump or not? And does a Trump Jr. brand hold MAGA together and keep it on its, I don't know, right? I think that's an open question and one we're going to find out sooner rather than later. But I think really it does split along the, do you believe in a sort of internationalist view that ultimately America is an example to set, that we ought to spread our ideals of freedom, free trade, democracy, things like that, a free market, that is something we should spread around the world, which I think is in part some of the free market intellectual thinking in the sort of more traditional sense of the Republican Party. I do think that where there is alignment is in cultural conservatism. So I think that will continue to be the through line that keeps this coalition together. But if you're asking me to name names, those are the names I would go to. Ask Chuck. This one comes from Judith Workman. Her question: is it possible that the roller coaster that we have been on for the last few days, meaning the stock market, be simply a way to manipulate the economy for Trump and others in the regime to bring the market down so they can purchase more stocks, et cetera, and then bring the market back up to increase their personal wealth? Well, Judith, look, you're not the only person who thinks this. There's no doubt there are people that are making money, manipulate, who may have an insider knowledge of where things are going. But no, I don't think there is a large chunk of people trying to do that. I do think there's the crypto community, particularly in the 24 election. I think there's quite a few people that are long on some crypto investments that are desperately hoping that they have value, and they're worried that it won't have value and are counting on Donald Trump to give them value. But I'm not sure I'm there on the full-fledged stock market manipulation, because perhaps there's some short-term traders, and if we had a more functioning SEC, maybe there'd be some legitimate investigations into this. But sadly, we don't have an SEC that is truly independent right now that I think should be looking at these things, especially in the world of Donald Trump, who, everybody sort of has the combination. I always joke Donald Trump is kind of like the Elaine character in Seinfeld when it comes to the vault, if you remember that. And Jerry Seinfeld used to say, well, everybody's got the combination. It was Hennessy. I think that was the brand of liqueur that all of a sudden she'd tell you everything she had. Donald Trump, he's made it clear, if you want insider access, pay $250,000 and come be a member of Mar-a-Lago, or come do this with crypto. Like, there is always access to him, and you might accidentally get a tip that can help you. But sometimes Trump's saying stuff that he wants to happen and it doesn't happen. And sometimes he says stuff that does happen and you could have made money on it. But there are so many people that have bought access to get close to him at his clubs in particular, that you can't rule out that possibility. I just don't think it's a full organized conspiracy, for what it's worth. All right. So with that, I think I'm going to wrap up this episode. Hope you enjoyed the week. If you haven't caught up on previous episodes, please do, because I know we've had some issues with the automatic updating among those that subscribe to the podcast on Apple. Obviously, even if you subscribe on Apple, come over to the YouTube channel, like and subscribe there. The Chuck ToddCast has a YouTube channel. You can check us out on Spotify or wherever else serves up podcasts. So with that, I'll see you next week till we upload again.